Hey guys, tonight we're going on a journey not through battlefields or royal chambers, but through the soft soil of ancient gardens. Lush, quiet, and long forgotten, you'll walk where the dew clings to morning vines and moonlight casts gentle shadows across the raised beds of a Camere gardener's world. The air smells faintly of lemongrass and wet earth. Somewhere nearby, frogs sing lazily in the canals that carry water from Angkor's mighty berets, those vast reservoirs engineered centuries ago. You move slowly, barefoot on packed clay, past rows of broad-leaved vines curling around bamboo trellises. You see vegetables you can't quite name, a striped melon, a fuzzy cucumber, stalks of something between a leek and a lotus. And beside you, a gardener in a simple cotton tunic wipes their hands on their skirt and says, "Don't worry, it's all edible." Probably. You probably wouldn't survive a week eating what the Camere grew in these gardens. Not because it was dangerous, though some of it might shock your modern stomach, but because you'd never recognize half the greens on your plate. They had names like Trakuan, Slek Cantrop, Pongmon Stao, and they were carefully cultivated, then quietly forgotten. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. Let's see who's drifting off in Tokyo or listening from a hammock in Belize. Now, settle in. The crickets are starting up, and the scent of something pickled is wafting from a clay jar behind you. Tonight, we begin in twilight, when the gardeners finished their day and the plants finally breathed easy. The sun is beginning to slip behind the sandstone towers of Angkor Wat. Shadows stretch long across the grass as temple bells call monks to their evening chants. But you're not in a temple. You're behind one, slipping quietly through a low wall of woven bamboo fencing into a garden that's mostly invisible to tourists. This isn't a ceremonial space. It's a kitchen garden, one of dozens that once circled the royal complex. The air feels dense and still. A long canal hugs the garden's edge, thick with water, hyacinth, and dragonflies. Mosquitoes start to rise, but you slap them away lazily, distracted by the rows of neatly spaced mounds and furrows. There's order here, carefully tended plots, some rectangular, some crescent-shaped. Each mound holds different leaves, some round like elephant ears, others jagged like spears. Here and there, clay pots are half buried among the beds, filled with water or a mystery paste. They're not just decorations, they're part of a delicate system. You stop beside a plant with long, slender pods and bright purple flowers. It hums faintly with bees. A gardener once told you, "That's Slek Chung Chang." You grind the leaves to soothe swelling. The pods go in sour stew. But there's no signpost here. No labels. The plants were known by memory, taught through hands-on care, passed from grandmother to granddaughter. You follow a narrow path toward the back. Here, shade trees lean heavily over the soil. Beneath them grow the cool weather herbs, coriander, culantro, and a lemony green called marum. A boy once used it to wrap grilled catfish. He said it kept the fish moist and your stomach lucky. Above, a hanging basket sways gently in the dusk breeze. It holds a trailing vine, green tendrils covered in pale white flowers. It's katkroch, an ancient climbing vegetable eaten young, pickled, or stuffed with minced frog and herbs. You wonder why no one sells this in modern markets. Beyond the vegetables, a row of taller shrubs lines the boundary wall. They're here not just for food, but to confuse pests. Camere gardeners practiced companion planting long before the term existed. A bitter leafy plant next to a sweet melon, a flowering herb between rows of long beans. Insects would get distracted, confused, or repelled altogether. No pesticides, just clever thinking. You kneel beside a patch of tiny green shoots, delicate, fern-like, and almost translucent in the fading light. This is Slek Stao, a wildly bitter leaf used in ceremonial soups. Children hated it. Elders swore it cured fevers. You pinch a leaf and taste it. Yes, still bitter, still wonderful. A faint scent rises, roasted coconut and sticky rice. Somewhere someone's cooking dinner, probably using a handful of these same herbs. Back in the day, these gardens were everywhere. Around homes, beside temples, even on floating bamboo rafts along the river. Vegetables weren't a luxury. They were medicine, ritual, survival. They were woven into daily life so completely that nobody thought to write their names down. And so, many have vanished. You walk a bit further. A cluster of plants shimmers with waxy leaves and tiny blue fruits. They look poisonous, but aren't. They were stewed with fish or mashed into paste with garlic. The Camere believed they cooled the blood. You believe they probably tasted like sorrow. Nearby, a patch of taro plants sits partly submerged in a shallow pit. Their broad heart-shaped leaves nod with the wind. The roots were roasted, the stems soaked in lime juice, and the leaves, only the brave ate those. The sun finally slips away. Night birds stir in the trees above. You pause by a tiny shelter, just a straw roof propped up on sticks. Beneath it, a worn mat and a basket of harvested greens. A gardener would rest here after hours in the heat, sorting leaves, trimming roots, whispering to the plants. You sit down too and let your legs stretch out. The garden breathes. The night hums softly. The vegetables sleep. And you wonder, what else did they grow? What has been lost simply because no one remembered to carry the seed? Let's rewind just a little. 1,000 years ago, the Camere Empire wasn't just one of Southeast Asia's most powerful civilizations. It was among its most agriculturally advanced. Monumental temples like Angkor Wat were impressive, yes, but the real miracle was water. The Camere engineered an entire landscape of reservoirs, canals, and raised fields to manage their seasonal monsoons. They built a water clock out of the land itself. This allowed them to grow multiple harvests per year, of rice certainly, but also vegetables. Gardens weren't left to wild chance. They were structured, observed, optimized. Gardeners were respected figures, especially those who served the palace. They had their own quarters, tools, and apprentices. Some were monks. Some were elderly women known for their healing teas. Others were simply quiet people who knew which leaf helped you sleep and which one you'd better chew slowly. Their journals? Spoken. Their seed banks? Clay pots buried under the floor. The day would begin before dawn. Tools were carried in woven baskets. Beds were watered with scoops from clay jars. The first job was observation. What had sprouted, wilted, or been nibbled in the night. Even pests were accepted as part of the system. Certain bugs were scooped up, dried, and sold in the market as snacks. Nothing wasted. A garden this size would feed not just a family but their neighbors. Leafy greens like sleckkantrop, a kind of wild amaranth, grew fast and filled stews. Young vines like katspe were harvested daily for stir-fries. If it could be eaten, it was planted. If it could be chewed thoughtfully, it was treasured. At festivals, certain vegetables were expected. Pickled bamboo, sour eggplant, spicy cucumbers. To show up without them would have been like forgetting the candles at a birthday party. These weren't side dishes. They were symbols of care. And at the heart of it all, seeds. Passed from hand to hand, wrapped in banana leaves or tied into hair braids, seeds were a form of legacy. Some were named after the grandmother who grew them best. Others were cursed, believed to bring storms if planted improperly. All were precious. Tonight, you're walking through all of it. Past the beds, past the stories, past the hands that once worked this soil. You're not harvesting. You're remembering. The crickets sing on. The night deepens. You lean back, close your eyes, and let the ancient garden wrap you in its quiet, green spell. The sky is the soft gray of morning mist, and the first light is beginning to melt the last of the stars. The stones of the palace are damp with dew, and the bamboo gates creak quietly as you slip past them. You are heading to the royal gardens, not the ones with towering frangipanis and ornamental pools, but the ones behind the kitchens, where vegetable plots unfold in meticulous rows. Here the ground is still cool from the night, and a young gardener is already at work. Her sleeves are rolled past her elbows, her skirt tied up for ease. You watch her crouch beside a row of seedlings and examine each one with the quiet reverence of someone inspecting temple relics. She hums a little as she works, not a song really, more like a private rhythm for moving through dirt. These gardens belong to the palace, not in a metaphorical sense. Literally, they were built to serve the royal household. The vegetables grown here would be destined for the court kitchens, feeding princes, scholars, generals, and sometimes even the king himself. The plots are arranged not for beauty, but for productivity and control. Each row is known. Each plant has a plan. You walk slowly between the beds. There are low woven fences separating the sections. Bamboo stakes mark off test rows, where gardeners experiment with a new climbing gourd or a recently introduced leafy green. Near the northern wall, a clay board shows smudged drawings of leaf shapes, a gardener's reminder maybe, or a note for the apprentices. There's no written Camere horticultural manual. This is the manual. This and the people who remember what was passed on. A boy jogs past you, holding a woven tray piled high with purplish pods and small white radishes still covered in dirt. He's headed to the kitchens, where cooks will argue over which vegetables are too young or too bitter for the king's lunch. Timing is everything. Some leaves must be picked before sunrise. Others wilt if handled too soon. A tender sprout might be tomorrow's soup or tomorrow's shame if it's too short. As you stroll further, you reach a patch of oddly shaped beds, circles nested inside each other like ripples on water. These are the demonstration gardens, where royal gardeners teach their apprentices the layout favored by the king himself. Raised edges hold back the flooding rains, and each bed contains vegetables grouped by flavor or temperature. Cooling greens together, sour herbs in a ring, heat-loving plants at the center. A man with a lined face and a limp walks past you, nodding slightly. He's carrying a cluster of sleckranhung, a wild leafy plant with a peppery bite. It's meant to be dipped in fermented fish sauce, prahuk, and served beside sticky rice. In the palace, even condiments had their preferred leaves. Pick the wrong one, and your dish was dismissed. You stop beside a small square plot where dozens of slender stalks rise from the ground, topped with silvery leaves. These are tranquil, a vegetable prized not for its taste, but for its texture, soft, slippery, and oddly soothing. When boiled, it thickens broths without turning them cloudy. It was often used in congee for elderly courtiers, or as part of the diet for recovering soldiers. A comfort plant? A quiet helper? The royal gardens were not static. They shifted with the seasons, responded to palace needs, and even mirrored astrological readings. If a court astrologer predicted illness, certain bitter greens were sown to prepare. If a foreign diplomat arrived from Champa, cucumbers and white squash, foods believed to cool tempers, were planted in abundance. In this way, the garden was as political as it was practical. One gardener, a woman known only by her title, May Sleck, Mother of Leaves, kept meticulous oral records of what each court guest disliked. She'd murmur to herself while planting, "The Cham priest chokes on basil. The Chinese trader fears bitter gourd. The Lao envoy only eats yellow roots." Her apprentices thought she was mad, but her dishes were never refused. A few steps further, you find the compost pit. It's sunken, shadowed by banana trees, and buzzing with flies. But even here there's care. Vegetable waste is sorted, soft stems for fast rot, woody stalks for slow mulch. Eggshells are crushed and mixed with ash. Nothing is wasted. And the pit is ringed with cantuet, a fast-growing, edible vine that thrives on decay. It spirals up the compost poles, its flowers bright yellow, its leaves harvested weekly for soup. Nearby, the scent of sesame oil drifts from a cooking hut. Morning prep is underway. Long beans are being cut into finger-length segments. Banana hearts are sliced and soaked in lime water. Fermented greens are stirred in clay pots to ensure even souring. It's quiet work, but purposeful. Each vegetable will find its place, either in a king's stew, a servant's porridge, or a monk's offering bowl. You pause by a shade shelter. A bundle of drying herbs hangs from the roof. Murum, camphor, and a few leaves you can't name. Beneath them, a small ledger, just a clay tablet with a grid scratched into it. No writing, only rows of pebbles, each symbolizing a harvest. This is how the garden is measured. Not in gold, but in how many times a plot fed a pot. The royal beds aren't all food. Some are planted with flowers, not for beauty, but for their pollen, their repellent properties, or their ceremonial use. Marigolds ward off pests. Blue lotuses are gathered for morning offerings. And a row of frilly-leafed Slektukpra grows behind the storage hut, crushed and steeped into a cold drink to reduce fevers, favored by concubines and palace guards alike. A rooster crows. The sky turns apricot. The gardeners stop for a moment to sip tea from gourd cups. You sit with them, and someone passes you a bite of steamed dumpling wrapped in leaves you don't recognize. It's earthy, slightly bitter, definitely fresh. You close your eyes and feel the sun begin to rise across the fields. These gardens were never just for sustenance. They were language, memory, policy, medicine, a daily act of caretaking that kept the heart of the empire beating. As the birds begin to call, you realize this garden has fed kings, cured generals, and cooled the heads of visiting nobles. But more than that, it has lasted. Even when the stone towers fell, even when the scribes left no recipes, the seeds of this place, quiet, unassuming, alive, remained buried, waiting. Waiting for you. By the time the sun has fully risen above the towers of Angkor Thom, the world has warmed to a honey-colored glow. The stone courtyards hum with distant footsteps, and the kitchen gardens behind the palace are now fully awake, rustling under the gentle breeze. You walk slowly along a narrow path of flattened palm fronds, the scent of wet earth and warm turmeric leaves wrapping around you like silk. Today you've come not to observe the palace beds, but to follow the trail out beyond the walls, to the surrounding villages and the satellite farms that supplied the empire's vast appetite. The royal gardens, exquisite as they were, could never meet the needs of a kingdom that fed thousands daily. And so, the Camere devised a network of rural plots, each specializing in a particular bounty, linked to Angkor like green veins, feeding a stone heart. You reach the edge of the outer moat and step onto a dirt road packed firm by generations of bare feet and ox cart wheels. The morning air carries the crisp scent of lemongrass, and in the distance, you can hear the splash of water buffalo cooling in irrigation ponds. You pass by rice fields, just beginning to show green tips, their neat rows mirrored in the still water. But you're not here for rice, not today. You're chasing the lesser crops, the forgotten greens, the village vegetables that once filled the bowls of farmers, priests, dancers, and scribes. Your first stop is a homestead where rows of climbing gourds twist up bamboo trellises. These aren't your standard bottle gourds or pumpkins, but kyang kavai, what might be called whisker gourds, due to the fine hairs that cover their skin like tiny antennae. The farmer, a broad-shouldered woman with a gap-toothed grin, snaps one off the vine and hands it to you raw. It tastes like nothing at first. Then comes a slight fizzing bitterness, not unpleasant, but surprising, an ancient natural preservative. These gourds, she tells you, were used to stretch stews in the heat of dry season, when meat spoiled quickly and flavor was hard to come by. Farther down the lane, you find PKA Stow, a tree whose leaves are so bitter they make your eyes water when picked. In modern times, you'd never think to serve them to a king. But in the empire, they were delicacies, Tender leaves served with grilled river fish, their bitterness offset by rich, oily sauces. An acquired taste, sure, but believed to cool the body and sharpen the mind. In wartime, estao was packed into soldier rations, thought to stave off illness and keep the blood light. Your next stop is a garden dug into the side of a gentle slope where vines trail over the ground in lazy spirals. These are tropsankea, sometimes called ghost cucumbers. White and faintly translucent, they were prized by dancers for their supposed skin-clearing properties. During festival seasons, court performers would rub slices on their faces before applying sap-based makeup. You try one and find it watery and sweet, like eating a memory. A few steps down, a wiry old man named Pulon leads you into a grove of strange, low-growing trees. Their fruit is small and nut-like, with wrinkled skin and a scent like green pepper. This is mamer, once used in royal soups to give depth without adding salt. Pulon points to a clay jug half buried near the roots. "We pickle it first," he says, "or else it speaks too loudly." The Camere had rules for taste: balance, harmony, silence. No ingredient was allowed to scream. You sit with him in the shade, sipping lukewarm water from a gourd cup. He tells you about his grandfather, who once worked in the palace kitchens as a spice boy. He wasn't allowed to touch the knives, Pulon laughs, but he knew where every leaf was kept. Said if the king ever sneezed, they gave him a stew of stow, lemongrass, and fermented galangal roots. Not for health, for dignity. As you walk on, you begin to notice the invisible infrastructure beneath your feet. Narrow channels carved into the earth snake alongside the fields. These aren't just for irrigation. They're delivery systems, carrying floating bundles of vegetables wrapped in banana leaves downstream to the city. A kind of lazy post, a vegetable courier service. Some bundles are marked with carved sticks. 3 notches means urgent. A single dot means for monks. Floating cabbages, drifting toward duty. You stop at a village known for its raised beds of champaiprang, a creeping herb with a pungent, almost fishy smell. It was never served fresh. Instead, the leaves were dried, ground, and used to perfume broth. It's a subtle note, one that would vanish if not brewed slowly. The best court cooks knew when to add it, not before boiling, not after, but during the second steam, when the soup sighs, but hasn't yet spoken. A young boy follows you with a basket of freshly cut greens. He introduces them proudly. Kradanong, Slek Shramur, Kachayet. You recognize none of them. Most don't appear in modern records. Some might be lost entirely, remembered only here, in a basket, carried by a barefoot boy whose great-grandmother once peeled these same leaves for a royal wedding stew. One cluster smells faintly of mint, but not quite. It's sharper with a metallic edge. You rub it between your fingers and imagine the taste, not for sweetness, but for grounding. It was probably used in a grounding tea, served after long ceremonies or during periods of mourning. The Camere had an herb for everything: sleep, speech, sadness. In another field, older women kneel beside narrow rows of root twins, 2 vegetables grown in the same soil for balance. One is tall and red-veined, the other squat and pale. Planted together, they pull different nutrients from the earth, never competing. When cooked together, they balance sweet and bitter. This concept of samapiap, balance, pairing, was more than culinary. It was cosmology. You pause beside a quiet corner where a single tree grows. Its bark is dark, and its fruit looks like a miniature drum. This is tramnang, the storyteller fruit, eaten by elders before long evenings of recitation, said to soothe the throat and loosen memory. You hold one in your palm and feel its weight, not heavy, but deliberate, like it knows how to be patient. The sun is high now, and the smell of fried shallots drifts from a nearby cook fire. You join a small group of farmers as they sit under a wooden awning, bowls in hand. Today's lunch is a simple porridge, rice, Water, a little fish, but studded with forgotten vegetables that sing in quiet harmony. A crunch here, a sour spark there, a cooling stem that lingers like mist. You eat slowly, tasting the past in every bite. As you leave, someone hands you a pouch of dried leaves and whispers their names like a blessing. You'll never remember them all, but that's not the point. The vegetables remember. They always have. The days stretch long in the Encore countryside, and even as the sun begins to tilt downward, the land is in no rush. It breathes slowly, exhaling through the wind that moves the sugar palms and sighing in the gentle splash of a clay jar being filled at the well. You follow this rhythm now, no longer walking like a visitor, but like someone born to these fields, one step at a time, soft-footed and tuned to the silences between bird calls. This afternoon, your path veers east, toward a region once famed not for its fruit or fish, but for its culinary trickery. Here, nestled in the semi-shade of acacia groves and jackfruit trees, lived the most artful illusionists of Camere cuisine, fermenters, grinders, bakers of ash-covered leaves, and extractors of oils so rare they were stored in bronze. You arrive at a compound with low thatched roofs and raised storage racks lined with shallow clay trays. The smell is unmistakable, an ancient tang of fermentation, warm and musky, like aged citrus and smoke. These trays hold flickering, the so-called sleeper paste. Not quite a pickle, not quite a sauce, but something in between. Made from crushed river snails, wild tamarind, and a soft-leafed vegetable now forgotten, it was aged under ash and banana peel. The effect? A gentle umami that lulled the body into slowness. It was often fed to night workers, scribes, dancers, guards of the midnight shift, who needed to stay alert, but calm. The Camere understood that sleep wasn't always about darkness. It could be induced by taste. At a nearby hut, an elderly woman named May Feek invites you to sit beside her as she stirs a pot over coals. She's making esra tnaot kroeng, a drink once reserved for the sick or grieving. Made from sugar palm juice, reduced over hours with shavings of a particular wild tuber, now vanished from common record. Its closest cousin might be a mix between licorice and wintergreen. She dips a wooden ladle and offers you a taste. It's sweet at first, then cooling, then nothing. A blankness like tasting a sigh. She smiles. "For empty days," she says and turns back to her pot. You walk to the edge of her garden, where neat rows of stalks rise from the soil. These aren't grains, but the tall skeletal stems of camnot, a fibrous hollow plant that villagers once used to trap vapor. Bundles of camnut were tied and lowered into boiling pots where they absorbed steam, flavor, and oil. Then the bundles were wrung out like towels, their juice saved and added back into stews, concentrated, rich, and strangely fragrant. It was said that camnot broth helped the elderly dream more clearly. From there, your journey leads you to an experimental grove, reconstructed recently by scholars using traces from temple bas-reliefs and oral memory. Here, researchers have replanted the long-lost moek satre, or lady's moss, a creeping, cushiony green that once grew at the base of tamarind trees. Its leaves were minced raw into herbal mixes, most often with galangal, kaffir lime zest, and the powdered shell of river crabs. The Camere didn't just eat for nutrition. They ate to align their humors, their breath, their emotions. In this dish, moek satre was believed to soothe jealousy and overheating of the spirit. Priests ate it before settling disputes. By the late afternoon, you've reached the workshop of a man named Tom, known as one of the few remaining brewers of Tu Krohum, the legendary red water. You sit with him as he adds flower petals, bark slivers, and ground root to a series of earthen jugs. It's an elaborate ritual. First, the ingredients are smoked over coconut husk. Then they're wrapped in fig leaves and buried for 10 days. Finally, they're mixed with water drawn from an east-facing well. The result? A faintly pink drink that tastes of pepper, sandalwood, and time itself. Once used during solstice ceremonies, Tuk Krohom was believed to reset the soul's calendar. Tom hands you a cup and chuckles. "You'll sleep like the Naga kings," he says, referring to the mythical serpents who dozed beneath Angkor, dreaming the monsoon into being. From Tom's place, your steps grow slower. You're full, not with food, but with impressions, tastes, textures that fill the mouth even when empty. You pass through a patch of woodland dotted with the Tinoap bai tree. Its leaves, when burned, release a smoke used to flavor dried banana leather. A forgotten delicacy made by layering mashed bananas with wild leafy infusions, then sun-drying them until pliable and smoky. Soldiers carried them on long campaigns, chewing slowly to fight thirst and homesickness. You reach a village shrine just as the sky begins to melt into copper. Here, monks are preparing jum slek kache, a broth used in funeral rites. Despite its sacred role, the ingredients are humble: water lily stems, jujube bark, and something called ghost leaf, a pale green leaf that, when boiled, turns clear and dissolves entirely. You never see it in the bowl, only taste its gentle earthiness. It's a disappearing act and a metaphor. All flavor, no body. Nearby, a young girl tends to a kitchen fire. She's roasting something that looks like bamboo, but smells faintly of citrus. You ask her name and she shyly says, "Kema." She breaks the stalk and reveals a fibrous vegetable stuffed inside with minced coconut and salt. It's luok chet, the monk's snack, eaten in the early dawn before fasting hours begin. It's chewy, fragrant, simple. It was never meant to be famous, only faithful. You sit with Kema and her grandmother as they talk about the changing seasons and the vegetables that come and go. "We used to eat clouds," the old woman says, half smiling. You raise an eyebrow. She explains, "A kind of seaweed from flooded rice fields. We called it kralan meha, the mist blanket. You boiled it and it vanished, but your belly stayed full." You stay until the stars begin to show. It's quiet now. The insects hum in gentle pulses, and the breeze has cooled. In the distance, a musician plays a ronit, wooden xylophone notes drifting like incense smoke. You make your way back through the fields. The forgotten vegetables of the Camere Empire are still here, not in grand museums or history books, but in gardens, in bowls, in memories whispered beside a fire. They are old, yes, but not gone. They live in roots, in ash, in broth. And now, perhaps, they live a little in you too. The next morning rises gently, without urgency. You awaken to the slow clatter of wooden ladles and the distant thump of pestles against stone. A rooster crows, not to command the day, but to sigh into it. The air is soft and already fragrant with the steam of boiling rice and the subtle sweetness of sugar palm sap warming over coals. You sit cross-legged beneath a thatched awning, a bowl of puffed rice and river honey in hand, as your journey turns toward a quieter, but no less fascinating corner of Khmer cuisine, what might be called its forgotten pharmacy. The vegetables and roots used not as food, strictly, but as medicine, as tonic, as daily maintenance for the body and mind. You begin by visiting a woman known as Ye-A Nak, whose garden is more apothecary than farm. There are no long rows of crops here, only dense patches of wild, tangling greens, tall stalks and creeping vines. She beckons you over with a crooked finger and offers a sprig of something that smells like mint but stings like pepper on the tongue. "This," she says, "is kachep pleuring, fire leaf." We chewed it when the rain wouldn't stop. The villagers believed fire leaf could dry the lungs, easing coughs and keeping fever at bay during the long wet months of monsoon. Beside it grows the squat woody bush of tramdam, its twisted roots resembling a bundle of sleeping snakes. This was the secret ingredient in old traveling soups. soldiers on jungle expeditions, would steep it into their meals to stay alert, to keep their joints from swelling in the damp. The flavor? Resinous, bitter, with an aftertaste like pine and chalk. But it was not meant to be delicious. It was meant to help you endure. You follow Ye Nak as she leads you deeper into the undergrowth, where the real treasures grow. Beneath the shade of tall ironwood trees, she points to a patch of pale green, fan-shaped leaves, by Trassorm. These were ground into a paste with fermented fish and bitter tamarind to make a medicinal chutney that soothed stomach aches and dizzy heat, what we might call nausea or vertigo. It made your thoughts fall into place, she explains, as if alignment of the mind was a matter of seasoning. From there, she leads you to her kitchen, where several strange vegetables lie soaking in ceramic basins. One, a long pale tuber flecked with deep purple veins, is dek chu, or cloud root. When sliced and boiled in coconut milk, it turned the broth a cloudy lavender and was said to calm noisy blood, a poetic way of referring to anxiety, agitation, and sleeplessness. It was often fed to young children and elders, who were most vulnerable to the restless spirits of illness. As she grinds a paste for later use, you notice a gourd hanging from the eaves of her home. It's not for decoration. This is Krolan Beck, the sleep melon. Though barely larger than a mango, it was dried and powdered to flavor bedtime drinks. Bitter, nutty, and cool to the tongue, it was used in temples, given to novice monks to help them meditate and resist cravings. It smooths the river, Ye Nak says, pantomiming the flow of energy through the chest. Later in the day, you leave her garden to visit a healer who lives at the edge of the marshlands, a quiet man named Firen, whose hut is piled high with bundles of herbs, hanging roots, and carved wooden bowls. He tells you stories as he prepares a daily tonic made from serecham, or peace shoots. These thin, reed-like vegetables were boiled into morning broths to help regulate the body's inner heat. You can't argue on a calm stomach, he says with a smile. Firen also shows you the preparation of Czech Priya bat, not bananas, as the name might imply, but a flowering stalk whose buds, when dried and powdered, were added to porridge. It was used for mourning, not to stifle grief, but to slow it, to give people time to feel without being overwhelmed. This, he says, was how we carried sadness without spilling it. As you sip from his calming tea, made with crushed petals of rumdul, the national flower of Cambodia, he tells you of a vegetable now considered extinct in the wild, slek kan lorng, mirror leaf. It grew in dry shaded ravines, and its juice was used in sacred rituals to reflect illness back into the world. The leaves were chewed by monks before certain chants. Even its name suggests clarity, transparency, and deflection. Some say it had no taste at all, only the feeling of coolness spreading across the tongue. By late afternoon, you make your way to the river, where herbalists once harvested slick choke, a lily-like plant with soft, edible petals. These were plucked just before dawn and added raw to salads or ground into powders. They were believed to lift melancholy and brighten the liver, a phrase that recurs again and again in ancient Camere medical texts. You taste a petal. It's faintly sweet, floral, almost nothing. And yet, as the river laps gently nearby, it's enough. You sit with a group of elderly women who gather at sunset to prepare a nightly mixture of krohom che, a reddish root boiled with lemongrass, ginger, and wild pepper leaves. It's the Camere version of a nightcap, not intoxicating, just warming. For when your bones remember too much, one of them laughs. As the light fades, you think of all these vegetables, not as ingredients, but as companions. Each one had a season, a temperament, a mood. Each served a purpose beyond flavor. They kept the spirit aligned, the body tempered, the mind quieted. You walk back through the darkening paths, a satchel of fire leaf in your hand, and the bittersweet tang of sleep melon still on your tongue. A warm wind rises from the rice paddies, and somewhere in the distance, a drum beats once, and then fades. You don't remember falling asleep, only the gentle feeling of being taken care of in a land where vegetables once whispered their own quiet cures. The next day, your path leads away from the kitchens and healing huts and toward the great watery heart of the Camere Empire. The canals and floating gardens that once rippled across the plains like a watery spiderweb. You're walking not along roads now, but narrow earthen berms separating broad, mirror-like fields. Everywhere there is water, still, greenish, and quietly teeming with life. These were not accidental floods. The Camere were master hydrologists, bending rivers and monsoons to their will. But what you begin to discover here is that this control of water wasn't only about rice. It was also about cultivating a second world, a vegetable world that floated, crept, and pulsed just beneath the surface. You pause at the edge of a canal where a family in a narrow dugout canoe is harvesting tranquil, water spinach. The children pull it in by the armful, laughing as frogs leap from the floating masses. This was one of the most commonly eaten wetland greens in Angkor, a fast-growing vine with hollow stems and crisp leaves. You nibble some raw from the bundle, grassy, faintly sweet, and just a little spicy. At night, it would be wilted in palm oil with garlic and fermented soybean paste. A humble dish, but one that once fed kings and farmers alike. As you drift deeper into the lowland basin, your guide, a wiry young man named Ki-U, points out strange floating mats covered in vegetation. These are raised gardens, their foundations made from layered water, hyacinths, and woven reeds, floating like green rafts. On them grow all manner of unusual plants, tiny gourds with translucent skins, pale shoots with curling tips, and waxy leaves that glitter in the sun. The Camere learned to grow vegetables where land couldn't be trusted, where the soil sank or vanished with the rain. One plant in particular catches your eye, Seng Tayuk, sometimes called mirror cucumber. It's a small oblong fruit with a pale green skin and watery, nearly tasteless flesh, but its magic was in its cooling effect. Crushed and applied to the forehead, it was said to pull heat from the blood. Soldiers carried it into battle not as rations, but as medicine, a natural cold compress tucked into woven satchels. Further along, you come upon a quiet pond choked with floating lotus. This isn't just for beauty. The Camere used every part of the lotus. The roots, crunchy and sweet, were sliced into salads. The young stems, peeled and eaten raw, offered a cooling bitterness prized in hot months. And the seeds, once dried and ground, were used in a kind of vegetable porridge, a sleepy-making dish for monks. Before long fasts, you're offered a bowl and slurp the thin, milky broth slowly. It tastes like patience. You pause at a stone platform where archaeologists believe a vegetable exchange once took place. Farmers arriving by boat, trading bundles of aquatic greens for fermented sauces, pickled roots, and smoked riverweed. Inscriptions suggest the canals doubled as slow-motion marketplaces, moving goods between temples and villages with the same grace as wind through a field. You imagine the quiet chaos of a floating vegetable bazaar, colors shifting on the water, voices murmuring like insects in the reeds. In the late afternoon, you visit a woman named Ratha, who grows pka chu, a rare floating herb with star-shaped leaves and an astringent, citrusy scent. She demonstrates how to bind it into garlands and hang it above sleeping infants to keep wandering spirits at bay. Not all vegetables go in the pot, she says, laughing. Some float above the bed. As the light begins to fade, you find yourself in a corner of the basin where the floating gardens have been left to grow wild. Here, long-forgotten vegetables mingle freely, feral cousins of cultivated crops. Do siem, a kind of wetland yam, Campea croang, a floating mint, and even Slek kolab, whose thick leaves once formed the base of a ceremonial dish given to retiring officials. The flavors have changed, toughened, become wilder. You taste a few with caution, marveling at how they've endured, untended, unrecorded, just floating. Night comes slowly here, as if reluctant to disturb the water. You lie back on a bamboo raft and watch stars appear above the drifting leaves. Frogs call, insects hum, and the scent of crushed lotus hangs in the air like a lullaby. Somewhere nearby, a boatman sings a vegetable song, naming plants in Old Camere, each one like a charm. Tranquil sang Pikachu. The tune is lazy and hypnotic. You don't understand every word, but you don't need to. The plants know their names. The water remembers. You close your eyes, rocking gently with the raft, full of floating gardens and edible stars. The morning sun filters through a curtain of mist that hugs the forest edges and slips low across the basin. As you stretch and rise, the scent of damp wood, soft herbs, and last night's ash fills the air. The floating gardens lie behind you now. Today, your steps will take you inland, to the upland terraces and dry season plots where another side of Camere vegetable life unfolds, one of seasonality, adaptation, and clever survival. The Camere Empire, you realize, wasn't one monolithic landscape. From the low, swampy plains to the red clay hills, from wide deltas to stony escarpments, the empire stretched across multiple ecosystems, and each one had its own hidden menu of vegetables. You begin your journey into the highlands, where the soil is sandy and the sun unforgiving. Here, farmers coax life from difficult terrain using ancient techniques: compost pits enriched with bat droppings, fire-cleared patches replenished with ash, and trenches dug to trap fleeting rain. Your guide, an elderly man named Sofik, explains it like a story. The soil is moody. You have to charm it. He introduces you to a cluster of terraced fields carved into the hillside like long, shallow steps. On these sun-baked ledges grows a humble but essential vegetable, trop, or wild cowpea. Its vines curl low to the ground, leaves broad and dusty. The pods are short, slightly hairy, and oddly curved, like half moons. It was not a glamorous crop, but it was reliable. Fast growing and drought hardy, it provided protein where rice would not grow. Sofik kneels and uncovers a buried treasure beneath a leafy bush, robak chok, a tuber with pale yellow flesh and the faint scent of chestnuts. It was only harvested after the third rain, when the soil had softened enough to give it up. This one is the stubborn kind, he says, tapping the root, but sweet when boiled with sugar palm. As you trek further inland, you come upon patches of knau cruach, or bitter jackfruit leaf. Unlike the sugary fruit it shares a name with, this vegetable is an acquired taste, chewed raw with fermented fish paste, or boiled in coconut vinegar to mellow its bite. It was favored by those who worked long days in the sun. It keeps the bile from rising, someone explains, as you sip a bitter broth laced with its leaves. In another clearing, you find rows of PK apring, a slender-stemmed flowering green whose bright orange buds taste faintly of green tea and citrus. These were for the temple festivals, harvested just once a year and added to celebratory stews, or folded into sticky rice parcels for traveling monks. They're delicate, fleeting, the sort of ingredient that requires a calendar and a little reverence. The afternoon heat intensifies as you reach a rocky plateau where the soil crumbles underfoot. Nothing should grow here, and yet it does. A wiry vine-like plant called sleckbrohat curls along the edges, its tiny leaves clustered in star-shaped spirals. It was dried and powdered for use in traveling rations, added to fermented rice cakes for strength. Soldiers and messengers alike carried small bundles of it wrapped in cloth, believing it warded off fatigue and mouth dryness, a poetic term for despair. You sit beneath a canopy of tamarind trees and are served a dish that surprises you, a warm, slightly sour mash of grated duach samnang, the luck yam. Pale green when raw, it turns translucent when steamed and gives off a scent like lemongrass and chestnut. No one grows it intentionally anymore. but your hosts recall their grandparents seeking it during wedding seasons and New Year ceremonies. It was believed to protect couples from quarreling. Toward evening, you enter a shaded grove where vegetables grow more like guests than residents. Here, under the cool filter of high trees, you find chungkrahom, a red-stalked fern with spiraled tips. Once served to scribes and temple workers, it was said to improve ink clarity, a metaphor, perhaps, for mental focus. It's stir-fried lightly in sesame oil and eaten with sticky rice. The taste is mild but grounding. You imagine monks writing late into the night, bellies warmed by this humble fern. A final stop brings you to the edge of an upland stream where women wash and sort the day's harvest. They offer you a taste of kei-troa, a gourd so small it fits in the palm of your hand. It was dried into beads or pickled in salt brine, used to mark the turning of seasons. When you bite into it, the flavor is surprisingly complex. Tart, grassy, a little spicy. This one tastes like time. One woman jokes, and everyone laughs. As the sun sets behind the ridge, the highland sky flushes violet. You walk slowly back through the terraced fields, fireflies rising around you like sparks. The dry land has yielded its secrets. Bitter greens, lucky roots, vegetables that thrive under stress and teach endurance without saying a word. The upland world fades into night. A breeze brushes your face, cool and dry, and you breathe in the dust, the leaves, and the memory of jackfruit shadows. You lie down beside a cooking fire, listening to the quiet rhythms of highland life, the sound of roots being rinsed, pots clinking, old women humming lullabies about ferns and lucky gourds. Sleep comes slowly, like a cool hand on your forehead, and when it does, it tastes faintly of cowpea and wild mint. Dawn breaks cooler in the northern reaches of the empire. You awaken wrapped in a light cotton shawl, the crisp air hinting at elevation. Today, your journey brings you to the frontier temples and border markets, outposts where the Camere Empire brushed against other civilizations, and where vegetables weren't just grown, but traded, borrowed, and occasionally smuggled. You follow a narrow path lined with wild turmeric and sharp-bladed lemongrass. At first glance, this area feels less structured, less planned than the temple cities and grand canals, but you quickly learn that here, in the threshold lands between Camere territory and their neighbors, an extraordinary culinary cross-pollination took place, one that birthed forgotten vegetables and hybrid recipes that defy origin. The first market you encounter is nestled beneath a tangle of fig trees. Farmers and traders squat behind baskets woven from rattan, their contents unlike anything you've seen before. There's a knobby root with skin like elephant hide, ramdingche, the elephant radish. It's said to have originated from Lao traders, then adapted by Camere cooks who slow cooked it into thick broths during cold mountain nights. It smells of earth and pepper, and when roasted, takes on a smoky sweet flavor that lingers long on the tongue. You're handed a bowl of porridge made from ampel peach, a fibrous stalk that looks like sugarcane, but tastes faintly like cucumber and cardamom. Your host explains that it came from hill tribes further north and was originally used to flavor ceremonial beers. But the Camere, always practical, turned it into a breakfast dish. Too sacred to drink, too useful to waste, he says with a wink. As you wander deeper into the outpost town, you begin to notice how certain vegetables blur national boundaries. A vendor offers you pickled saksum, a pale green tuber that grows only in the misty mountain clefts where Cambodian and Thai territory overlap. It's sour, slightly floral, and strangely addictive. You chew slowly and picture traders crossing forests with baskets of these in tow, exchanging them for beads, ink, or bolts of cloth. You pause beside a roadside shrine where a monk tends to a garden of curious spindle-thin gourds tied to bamboo stakes. These are for memory, he says quietly. Boiled with salt and ginger, they keep the mind from wandering. He calls them slek tumnob, or retainer leaves. Some scholars believe they were used in early education rituals, fed to young boys training to be scribes. You imagine a child sipping vegetable broth before reciting prayers, his mouth warm, his hands ink-stained. In the cool hours of late morning, you make your way to a fortress temple once stationed to monitor movement between kingdoms. Here, vegetable gardens grow in defensive spirals around the outer walls, a security strategy turned survival tactic. You're told that in times of siege, these ringed plots provided crucial nutrition. One standout crop, Priya candor, a species of edible thistle whose bitter spines soften when steamed. Mixed with rice, it was both sustaining and symbolic, eating the thorn to find the root of patience. A retired soldier named Nay invites you to his modest home and shows you an ancient map with painted symbols. Among them, a trio of triangular leaves. He explains they represent Slek a spicy creeping plant that was once traded as far as Champa and Dai Viet. Some called it the whisper herb, he says. A little makes you sharp, too much makes you dream. You taste it raw and the effect is immediate. A warming tingle on the tongue, a flood of saliva, and a strange clarity that comes and goes like wind in the pines. In the afternoon, you attend a feast prepared by families from multiple border communities. There are no clear lines here. Vegetables from Camere, Lao, Thai, and Hill tribe traditions mingle freely on leaf-wrapped platters. There's a salad of mountain bean sprouts soaked in tamarind molasses, pickled snake-gourd ribbons twisted into rosettes, fried rhodoque, a tree leaf that tastes like lemon and wild garlic. You can't draw borders on the tongue. One woman laughs. Everything here has a borrowed name. You find a shaded spot near a ruined watchtower and listen as elders swap stories about old trade routes. One remembers carrying fermented bamboo shoots packed in clay jars on a journey lasting 2 weeks. Another recalls a dish made from a now extinct climbing squash with skin like bark and seeds the size of teeth. It fed us when no one else would, she says. You nod, thinking of all the vegetables lost not to time, but to politics and climate. As evening falls, you're handed a small cup of warm liquid brewed from trop empeuve, a dried flower that blooms only during the coldest nights. The infusion is faintly purple, floral, and soothing. It was drunk by border guards before long shifts in the mountain passes. To keep the cold and the ghosts away, someone murmurs. That night, you fall asleep on a bamboo mat, wrapped in a thick cotton blanket. The borderlands settle around you with a hush of old trails and older recipes. The wind stirs the fig trees, and somewhere nearby, a lizard chirps once, twice. In your dreams, vegetables carry passports, whispering in dialects of spice and root. You understand none of it, and yet it feels like home. The morning air here is thicker, fragrant with wood smoke, rice steam, and the faint perfume of flowers you can't name. You've reached the monastery belt, an arc of sacred land where monks gardened, students chanted, and ancient recipes were inked in palm leaf manuscripts. These weren't farms exactly, but gardens of intention, places where vegetables were chosen not only for their taste or nutrition, but for their symbolism, ritual role, or philosophical meaning. Today you're invited into one such monastery, nestled between 2 low hills and surrounded by sandstone walls stained with centuries of rain. The gates open quietly. Inside, silence, broken only by birdsong and the scrape of a hoe on soil. The head gardener is a novice monk no older than 17. His saffron robe flutters as he stoops beside a neatly ordered row of Slek champé, small white shoots said to represent clarity of thought. We don't eat these, he says, offering a faint smile. We watch them grow, like patience. You follow him into a garden that feels more like a meditation maze than a farm. Here grow vegetables you've never seen before, curling vines with star-shaped leaves, bitter herbs with names that translate to things like reflection leaf and root of humility. These were the plants selected by temple chefs and scribes, not for feasting, but for balance. for calm. One such plant is tropcrovan, a narrow-leafed green resembling watercress, but with a taste somewhere between basil and sandalwood. It was used in cooling meals, prepared during long study sessions or periods of silent retreat. The novice explains that too much heat, whether in the body or the mind, was believed to cause restlessness, poor concentration, and bad dreams. So, temple cooks would craft bowls of broth laced with cooling greens, calming roots, and a pinch of salt. To sleep like a scroll, he sementabias, natiyamanomol, he says. Nearby, you find kemunu, a root vegetable shaped like a long tear. Its name means person's regret, but don't let that fool you. When steamed and crushed with sesame and honey, it forms the base of a dessert served during funerals and memory ceremonies. Not mournful, but grounding. It brings you back, says an elderly monk, tapping his chest. In another section of the monastery, students gather at a low table to sort seeds. You watch as they separate pods of tropring mai, a ceremonial legume used once a year during the rain retreat. Eaten by monks observing strict silence, it was believed to keep the voice soft should speech slip out. They also prepare bundles of dried pichika dung, a floured shoot steeped in coconut oil and rubbed into rice as a kind of sacred seasoning. It doesn't taste like much, one boy admits, but it makes you grateful. The afternoon brings you to the kitchen, where a quiet monk ladles a thick stew into shallow clay bowls. It's made with dambok kayal, or breeze gourd, a pale-skinned fruit that grows in trellises around meditation halls. When eaten raw, it causes drowsiness. When simmered slowly, it induces lucidity. Legend claims the Buddha once broke a fast with this very gourd, served by a village elder who mistook it for a melon. A happy accident, the monk says, smiling. You sip the broth slowly and feel a heaviness in your limbs, not unpleasant, but steadying. This wasn't food meant to energize, but to soften, to settle the spirit. You can see why it belongs here. Out in the shade of a Bodhi tree, old palm leaf manuscripts lie weighted with stones. One contains sketches of vegetables that no longer grow. Contracleek, a long shimmering leaf thought to glimmer at night. Trochankran, a vine whose roots were once fed to monks before initiation. The temple lost its last seed during a fire decades ago. We keep the name, a monk tells you. The memory is still nutritious. As golden light spills across the courtyard, monks gather to prepare the evening meal. No garlic, no onions, too stimulating, they say. Instead, mellow gourds, slippery ferns, a soft puree of aurkarith, or joy buds. These tiny blooms were steeped in tea or mashed into sweet rice paste for feast days. Children loved them. They're served with a whisper of cinnamon and a flake of jaggery. One monk explains the difference between worldly food and mindful food. The former fills the stomach, the latter the space between thoughts. As he speaks, he slices thin sheets of dried krahomslek, an edible red moss that grew near temple ponds. Once considered a weed, it was folded into dumplings eaten after all-night chants. We chew slowly like prayer, he says. Night comes gently to the monastery. Fireflies flicker along the garden paths. Bowls are washed without clatter. You lie down on a woven mat inside the outer shrine, lulled by the faint scent of steamed greens and candle smoke. There's a small bowl of tro ampuv tea beside your head, the same flowered infusion you tasted days ago in the borderlands, an echo from another world. Here, vegetables are more than food. They are metaphors, habits, gestures. They teach silence. They reward stillness. And as sleep closes around you like a folded robe, you feel what the monks must feel, not fullness, but peace. Morning returns with softness. A single bird calls from the banyan above you, and in the distance, gongs hum low like breath in stone. You rise, careful not to disturb the stillness. The monastery recedes behind you in the mist, its gardens of intention and flavor already taking on a dreamlike cast. Today, your journey bends towards something stranger, quieter and more elusive. The wild cousins of Camere vegetables. Plants too rebellious for cultivation, too clever to vanish completely. The forest thickens quickly. This is the domain of Nikta spirits and forest monks, of hermits who traded palaces for trees. Your guide is one such hermit, a lean man with skin like folded bark and eyes that gleam with mischief. You want lost vegetables? He asks. You must walk where recipes fear to follow. He leads you down a narrow deer path flanked by ferns and fruiting vines. The air smells of earth, rain, and something electric. Soon you spot your first subject, Chaz Rolak, or laughing vine. It spirals up a dying jackfruit tree, its pale shoots covered in tiny red bulbs. Bitter when raw, sweet when roasted, it was once used to season temple rice on New Year's Day. No one farms it. It refuses to grow in cleared land, but it still appears, uninvited at the edges of old villages. A few meters on, you encounter Slek Krabap, a fan-shaped leaf that grows in damp hollows and exhales the scent of lime and mint when crushed. Lizard lettuce, the hermit jokes, because only fools and lizards eat it raw. Yet boiled and drained overnight, it was a staple for traveling hunters, said to sharpen sight and still the breath. You chew a leaf tentatively. It numbs the tongue, then releases a slow warmth, like tea poured down the spine. Deeper still, under a fallen log slick with moss, he shows you Krohub Tuk, a knotted root with a faint glow in the dark, used in ancient rituals to ward off illness, and, more practically, mixed into soups during monsoon fevers. It teaches the body to wait, your guide says, to sleep while it fights. You cross a shallow creek where green orchids bloom and step into a clearing scattered with what looks like wild yam. But the hermit corrects you. This is tralimsor, or false yam, a long-forgotten vegetable that mimics more common roots, but grows only in burned clearings. When the empire cleared land for rice, he explains, this came after, uninvited but helpful. You bake it in a hollowed gourd over coals and taste something smoky, starchy, and oddly reminiscent of sweet potato with a hint of pepper. Near a ruined boundary marker, you find the ghost of a garden, wild Tropsramor, tall and reedy, sprouting between collapsed stone. The hermit tells you this once bordered noble estates. A humble grass, maybe, but its tender shoots could be mashed into a paste that settled the stomach after heavy meals. For the overfed and underprepared, he chuckles. A bit further on, you come upon Dambang clay, a vine whose heart-shaped leaves were boiled with salt and palm sugar into a syrup given to children for nightmares. Your guide makes you a small batch in a blackened pot. It's viscous and soothing, with a flavor somewhere between anise and ginger. The kind of thing you didn't know you needed until it coats the back of your throat like balm. At midday, you rest beside a stone stupa, long swallowed by banyan roots. The hermit shares a meal of roasted seeds from tranquil chom, a spiny fruit that splits explosively when ripe. These seeds were gathered with ceremony, once traded among forest tribes as offerings during drought. Toasted, they taste of almond and smoke. Rare, not because they're hard to grow, he says. Rare because we forgot how to wait. In the afternoon light, the jungle reveals its strangest offering, Pka Romdul Singat, a flowering shrub that emits a subtle hum, too low for some to hear. Its petals, bright pink and gold, were once brewed into a sleeping potion for warriors returning from battle, not to knock them out, but to help them dream in peace. You pluck one petal and inhale its clean, sharp scent, like lemongrass and rain. As the sun tilts west, your guide leads you to a tree that grows in a spiral. Cray Cambit, its name means unwinding sorrow. Its bark, grated and mixed with honey, was turned into a paste and fed to grieving widows in old village rituals. Not medicine exactly. Just a gesture, a pause. We used to believe even sadness needs seasoning, he says. Evening creeps in like a shadow made of green. The forest comes alive with insects and distant bird calls. You camp beside a natural spring where the hermit offers you a final taste, Doc Cleang, or whisper blossoms. These tiny purple flowers are so delicate they wilt at the touch. You sip a tea brewed from them. It tastes like old songs and the space between raindrops. That night, beneath a canopy of stars and tangled branches, you sleep not as a traveler, but as something wilder, a listener, a guest. Around you, the wild vegetables of the Camere Empire bloom quietly, asking nothing but to be noticed. They are not cultivated, they are not labeled, but they are not gone. You wake to dew and birdsong, though it's hard to tell where one ends and the other begins. The forest has softened overnight, and your breath hangs in the air like incense. The hermit is already gone, his fire cold, his footprints fading into the ferns. But you carry his lessons with you now, lessons not written down, but tasted. In the numbing leaf, the peppered root, the syrup that soothed 1,000 nightmares. Today, your path bends toward the borderlands of memory. Not wild, not quite cultivated. This is the land of refugee gardens and migrating flavors. After the fall of Angkor, waves of Camere people drifted across rivers and borders, carrying with them fragments of empire, a folded cloth, a tale, a seed. And where those seeds fell, new gardens grew, small, resilient, adapted. You find one such place tucked behind a stilt house near the Tonle Sap's edge. The family here are fishers, but their backyard hums with old growth, plants older than the house, older than the fence, older perhaps than the family line. The grandmother gestures to a leafy patch behind the henhouse. This one, she says, came from my mother's mother. We don't know the name. We call it the Quiet One. You kneel beside it. Tror Bang Shramat. That's the old name you'll learn later in a manuscript fragment. It means forgotten companion. A dark leafy green, its stems purple at the base, its leaves shaped like soft blades, eaten raw in sourfish salad, or wilted with lime juice and left in the sun. Very gentle, the grandmother says. Good for sadness. Across the road, a cousin grows Meralak Bampeng, a bitter melon variation once used in Camere medicine to cool the fire of the eyes. Pickled, it's crunchy and bright. Grilled, it darkens to sweetness. The family serves it with rice and preserved crab, a dish whispered from older kitchens. We changed it, says the cousin, but the bones are old. In a schoolyard nearby, children munch on green sticks dipped in salt and chili dust. These come from the Dambong Kiev, a tree that once shaded palace courtyards. The sapling versions were planted here by a retired soldier who remembered chewing them during training. Keeps the mouth busy, he laughs, and the stomach quiet. As you wander farther through the province, you encounter traveling sellers offering bundles of greens strung with twine. Some are common, morning glory, young papaya leaf, but others bear nicknames that hint at exile. Border fern, lost aunt's okra, ghost spinach. One seller explains, these were grown by people moving. No land, just pots and baskets. At a refugee site turned village near the Vietnamese border, a woman shows you her garden grown entirely in cracked clay pots. She points to Tre Pleur, a spindly herb that smells like lemongrass and salt. We made soup with this when nothing else grew. Just this, water and hope. It once grew wild near Angkor's reservoir walls. Now it hides in rusted tins and plastic buckets, still feeding. In the marketplace, under patchy tarps and plastic covers, vendors whisper secrets over herbs. You learn to spot the old varieties. Con Hay Troc with its hairy stem and lemony burn, Pralenbeck, whose tubers sleep all dry season and erupt after the first rain. Domlong prey, a root now illegal to export, once used in royal feasts. These aren't luxury goods. They're survival flavors, memory flavors. You stop at a roadside shrine where offerings sit beneath a Bodhi tree. Among the usual fruits and incense, a small pile of tiny green pods. You recognize them from your temple visit. They're maktrot, once fed to monks before long recitations. A boy explains they were his great-grandfather's favorite. He said they made his dreams shorter, so he could wake up happy. And then there's cravandum, the climbing pea that now only grows where fences sag. Its curling tips were once prized in palace stews. Now they're mixed with river fish and served with fermented rice, a humble resurrection. You taste it in a roadside stall. It's faintly sweet, barely bitter, as though it remembers itself only halfway. As the day deepens, you visit a man who preserves ancient seeds in glass jars. Some of these, he says, gesturing to a dusty shelf, came from my mother's apron, smuggled in when we fled. He grows them in a patch behind his house. 12 old vegetables, each with a name and a story. You recognize Tropring Mai from the monastery and Faka Romdul Tsunga from the forest. Here they thrive, shoulder to shoulder, in one of the last gardens of remembrance. These plants, he says, they're not lost. Just waiting for us to remember how to taste them. Evening returns slowly. In a village courtyard, women gather to chop herbs for a stew called Samlor Tuk Brohot, soup of the surviving water. The base? A root you saw days ago but didn't know the name of, Tro Ampuv, the calming one. It simmers with fish sauce, wild mushrooms, a spoonful of coconut cream. Children pass around bowls. Elders smile without speaking. That night, as frogs sing and stars tremble over the tonle sap, you realize these aren't just vegetables. They're archives of movement, of migration, of mouths that fed others before themselves. Not wild, not cultivated, carried. Like prayers, like songs, like seeds in the hem of a skirt. The next morning, the air is heavy with mist and the far-off croak of frogs winding down their night-long songs. You rise slowly, not quite ready to leave the village gardens behind. Their smells still cling to your sleeves. Lemongrass oil, smoked fish, banana leaf ash. You've tasted exile and return. Now it's time to step into the other space Camere vegetables once lived, the Temple of Power. You head toward what remains of a royal estate, following the narrow paths through bamboo groves and flooded rice paddies. The road curves gently to reveal stone lions and naga balustrades rising from the earth like bones of a forgotten beast. Once, this would have been the seat of ministers, generals, queens. Now only fragments remain. Shattered columns, sun-warped carvings, the echo of silk moving across thresholds long vanished. But beneath the weeds, there's still growth. That's what you've come to see. The estate's last caretaker, a stooped man named Van, meets you with a broom and a pot of tukralan, roasted coconut water infused with wild ginger and queen's basil. He pours you a cup. They drank this in the mornings, he says, before decisions. You sip. It's smoky, bright, and grounding. And just like that, the ghosts arrive. As you walk the moss-covered courtyard, Van points to patches of overgrowth. Here, a stand of Domnung Krahom, a reddish leaf that once flavored wedding feasts. There, a wilted cluster of Shra Lao Sum, whose leaves were wrapped around sticky rice for royal offerings. Not for eating, Van notes, for memory. In the shade of a fallen colonnade, he kneels and uncovers Kantoi Chet, a now rare legume that only flowers at the exact midpoint between rainy and dry seasons. You miss it by a day, he warns. You miss the year. In the past, cooks made a jelly from its blossoms, pale blue and lightly bitter, to cleanse the palate between royal dishes. Around the rear of the compound, you find a sunken garden, partly flooded. In the green water float lily pads and long pale stems. This is where Phka shreng, or echo flower, was once harvested. Delicate and nearly tasteless, its petals were added to cooling broths that accompanied royal speeches. Van says, they believed it helped one listen more deeply. Near the servants' quarters, a vine snakes across a collapsed archway, Angdor Che, a creeping herb used to season rice for scribes and ministers. It made you patient, Van tells you. Or so the cook said. You crush a leaf and breathe it in. Pepper, dust, and something like time itself. Not far from there, a wide bush of slar bang sek holds its ground. This plant, used for temple incense and fever cures, once marked the entrances of noble kitchens. It's faintly camphorous, with silvery underleaves that shimmer in low light. It doesn't like noise, Van explains. Too much shouting, and it vanishes. You follow him to what was once a royal kitchen. The walls are nearly gone, but blackened cooking stones remain. Van points to a low patch where green shoots pierce the moss. That's tong mangkol, used to thicken sauce for the king's midday meal. You taste a bit raw. It coats the tongue like okra, but finishes with an almond edge. Further along, under a collapsed roof beam, lies a plant Van calls Tre Pnek Pria, or the monk's ear. A rare mushroom that only blooms in silence, it was added to lunar feasts and offerings to wandering spirits. It grows, he says, when you say nothing and wait. In the quiet center of the garden, you encounter Krallen Jeb, once used only by the queen's cooks. A root so pungent it could ward off illness and arguments alike. It was grated into tea, served before negotiations. She said it made her harder to lie to, Van says with a wink. Later, as the sun rises high, he leads you down a hidden path to the remnants of a spa pool used by palace women. Along the edges grow herbs you haven't seen anywhere else. Pakatuk, a yellow flower that sweetens water and softens skin. Saoi prong, a creeping mint used in a paste to ease labor pains. Beauty was a recipe too, he murmurs. At the very edge of the compound, where stone gives way to dust, stands a single praline pitch tree, the so-called jewel fig. Its fruit is small, amber-hued and slightly sour. Once reserved for festival sweets, it was believed to draw out lies when consumed with honey. You taste one, sticky and sharp. It leaves your lips tingling. You sit with Van beneath the tree as shadows stretch. He hands you a woven pouch filled with dried herbs. These are the last of what we remembered here, he says. If you carry them, perhaps they'll remember you too. Night settles around the palace ruins. Cicadas cry softly. The stones cool beneath your feet. In the kitchens of power, in gardens once planned for grandeur, the vegetables linger, not because they are tended, but because they are persistent. Not lost, just patient. The next morning breaks with a hush, as if even the sun is pausing to listen. You rise from a makeshift cot in Van's garden, the scent of his herbal tea still on your breath. There's a solemnity to the air now, the kind that comes when history begins folding in on itself. You're not just chasing vegetables anymore. You're tracing something more fragile. Memory's last root hairs clinging to soil no one remembers tilling. Today, your path leads into the territory of myth, half-truth, and the perilous border between sacred and secret. You're traveling now into the realm of ceremonial vegetables, the plants grown not to feed mouths, but to nourish rituals, symbols, and seasonal clocks. The first stop is a small temple tucked into the edge of a sacred forest. It's a modest structure, wooden beams, a sloped thatch roof, painted trim peeling with age, but its grounds are alive with plants unlike any you've yet seen. The head monk greets you with a gentle bow and beckons toward a garden behind the shrine. This is Chanpreya Kriyung, he says, gesturing to a leafy herb with a deep violet vein, used only during chumben, never eaten on normal days. Crushed, it smells of citrus and smoke, It's offered alongside sticky rice and chants for the dead. They say the souls recognize the smell and come closer. Nearby, a small stand of tranquil sways in the breeze, a crimson-stemmed vegetable once believed to bloom only in years of good omens. Temple cooks used it in a sour broth served only on the first full moon after the harvest. "It's the only time it tastes right," says the monk. "Other days, it bites the tongue." You watch a nun prepare a paste from a root called boeng tuk. Rarely seen outside temple kitchens, it's ground with sesame, coconut, and salt, and painted in a swirl on banana leaves, used in wedding blessings. To protect against forgetting, she says with a shy smile. On another altar, a tray holds offerings for the Nik Ta, local guardian spirits. Alongside incense and rice, a bitter green lies wrapped in lotus petals. It's called clock va, translated loosely as regret leaf. You offer it, the monk explains, when asking to be spared a bad harvest or a broken heart. You follow the monks into a shaded hall used for ritual cooking. The air is thick with ginger, wood smoke, and old prayers. There you find a cluster of PhA Ramsai, tiny white blossoms once blended into ceremonial kanji during royal births. Only the midwives knew how much to use, says an elder nun. Too much, and the baby would dream too hard. Outside, where the forest presses in close, a vine called Kanhei Prehakam climbs the shrine wall. It only flowers after lightning storms. When it does, monks collect it in silence, steep it into tea, and drink it before long meditations. It's not for flavor, the monk tells you. It's for remembering who you are before you were. Later in the day, you reach another temple, this one much older, more hidden, half swallowed by vines and rumor. Here, the rituals are quieter, older still. An old woman shows you a plot of Shrallantuk, a sweet, watery tuber that bleeds pink when cut. It was fed to oracles before trance rituals, thought to unclog the dreams. She also shows you Phka Chumriap, a flower whose petals are pressed into wax seals during oath ceremonies. The petals release a faint vanilla smell and, according to tradition, harden the truth. You kneel near a pond where Torkwang Shrala, literally the vine of quiet love, blooms under floating boards. It's used in fidelity ceremonies for newlywed couples. Each partner eats a single raw tendril while looking into a bowl of still water. If the reflection stays, the elder explains, the marriage is true. You're invited to watch a temple feast marking the day of the Wat. The meal is simple: rice, fermented fish, wild greens. But among the vegetables is chek lui, a narrow yellow stalk with a sour-sweet burst. For laughter, says a young novice, it's always eaten last. So you leave smiling. By dusk, you arrive at a monastery deep in the forest, where a solitary monk is said to preserve forgotten temple flavors. His name is Sam. He doesn't speak much, but he guides you by lantern to a garden protected by bamboo fences and chants carved into the posts. There, under the glimmering stars, you see them, the ceremonial plants once thought extinct. Tumpor Prea Reach, with its curling white shoots once used in the food offerings for royal funerals. Tropralai Bestong, a stunted bitter herb that was buried with monks to give flavor to the next life. Pkam Kachan, a flowering stem you recognize from temple carvings, its juice used to anoint sacred statues before rain festivals. Sam lets you taste a broth he makes from all three. It's unlike anything else you've had. Earthy, bitter, floral, smoky. A sip tastes like the edge of a storm. A second sip tastes like the memory of fire. A third, you can't quite describe. As the night deepens, you help Sam hang bunches of herbs to dry. We don't grow them for eating, he says quietly at last. We grow them to remember how sacred hunger once was. And as the fire crackles low and monks chant softly behind the shrine walls, you realize Not all vegetables were grown for the body. Some were grown to feed the soul, to flavor the invisible. You wake to the scent of charred lemongrass and slow-turning soil curled beneath a wooden awning of the monastery, where Psalm's sacred vegetables breathe through the mist. Sleep clings to you like wet cloth, heavy and strange, filled with fragments of dreams that smell of bitter broth and old prayers. You rise slowly, your limbs echoing with the rhythm of chants still trembling in the air. This morning, your journey veers from the solemn quiet of monasteries into the gentle chaos of Camere marketplaces, ancient centers of trade, chatter, and culinary improvisation. If the temples preserved the vegetables of ritual, the markets preserved the vegetables of the people, adaptable, seasonal, shaped by whim and scarcity alike. You begin with the oldest known market ruins along the edge of a dry riverbed, once used for barge trade. The stones are low now, overtaken by weeds, but local oral traditions still remember its name, Sar Domnak, the boat market. Villagers claim that in the days of the empire, floating kitchens served everything from freshwater crab soup to iced tamarind broth, made with ingredients bought from passing farmers. A retired boatman named Theon acts as your guide. He recalls stories from his grandfather, who swore by the curative powers of Sleckbach, a bruised leaf green that would foam slightly when steeped in rainwater. Sellers said it made you dream about your ancestors. Theon smiles. It also cured a nasty belly. As you explore the skeletal layout of the old stalls, each one now little more than a notch in the mud, Theon paints a picture. Baskets of fermented gourds wrapped in palm husks, piles of kanket priya, the royal frogweed, sold only during flood season, chopped roots laid out on lotus leaves, advertised with songs from teenage vendors. You cross a worn footpath to a still functioning rural market nearby. Modern, yes, but scattered with echoes of what was. The vegetable sellers greet you with knowing eyes and busy hands. They are mothers, grandmothers, cousins, herbalists, each one a memory keeper. One woman, her hair bound in red cotton, offers you ample cran, a spiny gourd that splits when grilled. Market food, she chuckles. Not temple food. You mix it with dried fish and whatever's left over. It smells of hunger turned inventive. You watch as a vendor crushes kaengbae, a chalky tuber, into a paste used to stretch rice flour when money runs tight. Next to her, another seller lays out demnaksen, a pale sprout once bartered in handfuls, said to bring luck if sold before noon. Afternoon ones get sour, she warns. Further in, a quiet man arranges bundles of sambarplung, or ghost's coriander. Not true coriander, milder with citrus undertones. He says it was used to season stews made during the transitional days between dynasties. A vegetable for in-between times, he calls it. You take a bowl of rice porridge from a young girl, whose cart smells of charcoal and star anise. She sprinkles on dried slivers of prek kachin, a root grown mostly in poor soils. My grandmother said kings never ate it. She shrugs. But it kept her alive. Around a corner, an old man roasts skewers of bok champé, jasmine buds, preserved in salted tamarind. He grins. It's not real food, he says. It's market food. It keeps your hands busy while you think. Later, in the shaded rear of the market, you find an unofficial swap station. Women and men trading bunches of uncatalogued greens, mystery roots, and backyard fungi. One woman offers you domnak kachan, a sharp onion-like herb with blue streaks. Good for forgetfulness. She winks. Maybe you'll remember something worth selling. You hear whispers about Traria prea, a leaf that changes color depending on the weather. It's rarely sold, but occasionally appears when a vendor wants to change their luck. No one tells you where it grows. Maybe no one knows. The smells of the market shift with the hour. Roasted corn, turmeric, wood smoke, overripe mango, mint, smoke, pepper leaves, fish paste. The rhythm is constant. Negotiation, complaint, compliment, laughter. Here, food is shared and shuffled, tweaked and tossed. You sip a local drink made from Krobei thong, a yellow-veined stalk pounded into syrup. The seller calls it market water. It's sweet, she says, so you don't taste what you can't afford. As sunset nears, the market begins to fold in on itself. Baskets are bundled. Ice melts into the dirt. Leftover greens are gathered, not thrown away, but shared with neighbors or repurposed into tomorrow's meals. There is no waste in the market, only transformation. Thean walks you back to the boat market ruins, now quiet beneath a peach-colored sky. In the old days, he says, markets were like temples. They had their own rituals, their own truths. You nod, understanding. The vegetables of the market may not have had sacred names, but they were part of the sacred cycle. Grown in mud, bartered with breath, eaten by hands that worked and held and built. And as fireflies blink through the trees and cooking fires flare to life in distant homes, you feel the pulse of it all. The unrecorded generosity of flavors that never reached the palace, but kept the people alive. You wake before dawn, mist still thick between the tamarind trees, dew clinging to your arms like a whisper. The boat market and forest shrines are behind you now, their stories folded into the soft sediment of memory. But today, your journey returns to the soil itself, not as metaphor, not as symbol, but as the real, granular earth in which these forgotten vegetables once grew. Today is for the seeds. You're greeted by Dara, a seed keeper from a small village near the base of Kulin Mountain. She's wiry, patient, sun-browned, and speaks with the quiet assurance of someone who knows that time doesn't always run forward. In her home, gourds hang from ceiling beams, split open and drying, their black seeds exposed like teeth in a grin. Cloth bundles sit in every corner, each one tied with care, labeled not with words, but with colors, beads, scent tags. You follow her through a field where nothing grows taller than your knee. This is seedland, she says. We let things grow old here, old enough to remember. She kneels and uncovers a patch of trombone, a once common climbing bean thought to be extinct. It stopped being tasty, she says with a shrug, but it never stopped being patient. She dries it, not for food, but for future soil. Nearby, you find Kaong Priya Reach, a curling root that once flavored royal rice wine. It grows now in a patch of poor earth. Dara says it yields fewer roots, but stronger seeds. We grow for the 10th generation, she murmurs, almost like a spell. In a bamboo box, she shows you pralui somnang, seeds so small they resemble tea dust. These are ghost cucumbers, she laughs. My grandmother swore they only grew when you sang while planting. She hasn't tried singing yet. She's waiting. Next to that box, you find a gourd seed wrapped in dried banana fiber, stitched closed with rivergrass. It's labeled only with a faint charcoal mark. 2 dots and a line. That's for Tanaut Campric, Dara says. The gourd that tastes like burnt rice and honey. No one's grown it in 70 years, but the seeds still wait. She leads you to a clay pot sealed with wax. Inside, Tropiang Kai, the well herb, known for surviving droughts that wiped out entire provinces. It's bitter, Dara explains, but you'll eat it when there's nothing else, and maybe love it by the 3rd bite. In the afternoon, you meet her neighbor, an elder named Lim, who spent the last 2 decades preserving wild cousins of domestic vegetables. Before the empire, he tells you, there were only the wild ones. They taught us what to tame. He shows you kralam preng, a fern-like sprout with sharp flavor, used as a spice in pre-Angkorian stews. It grows best in acidic soil and shade. No one wants to eat it now, Lim says, but its genes might save something else someday. You touch seeds so tiny, they slip under your fingernails, others as fat as marbles. Some smell of cinnamon, Others like nothing at all. Each one is a time capsule, a question, a story trapped in cellulose. You learn that seeds travel strangely. Some were smuggled across borders in shoes. Others were stored in temple crypts. A few were spat into riverbanks by bored farmers decades ago, forgotten until rediscovered by accident. The empire fell, but the seeds burrowed deeper. You visit a school where children are being taught to save seeds by tracing their names in sand. They must feel the name, says their teacher, not just hear it. One child shows you her favorite, Kankep, a tuber that grows in spiral shapes. My grandmother says it makes soup taste like secrets, she says shyly. At another house, an old woman unrolls a bamboo mat containing her entire vegetable lineage, 30 seed bundles, each wrapped in dyed cotton. Some of these don't even grow anymore, she says, holding them like fragile artifacts. But I still plant them, just in case. As the day fades, Dara takes you back to her seed hut. You help her hang bundles of crackle, a leafy green that was used in one single festival meal, centuries ago, and then disappeared from recipes. It tastes bland, but makes the stomach feel heard, she says. Together by lamplight, you grind some of the older seeds into powder, no longer viable for planting, but still useful for traditional dyes. The past always finds another use. Before bed, she gifts you a single seed wrapped in paper bark. It's from a vegetable she hasn't named yet. It hasn't told me what it wants to be, she smiles, but it will. You fall asleep to the sound of seeds drying, crackling softly in their shells, like faint whispers from the deep past. A lullaby of future harvests still sleeping. The sky is violet when you stir, the air thick with the scent of new soil. Somewhere behind you, the seed hut still breathes quietly, holding its centuries of potential. But this morning, your path winds toward silence, toward a part of the empire not etched in stone, not sung in prayers, but buried. The forgotten vegetable fields of the Camere countryside, now just ghost lines beneath rice paddies and tangled vines. You walk alone now, a slow rhythm settling into your steps. Villagers have pointed you here, not with maps, but with gestures and riddles. Turn where the cows forget their names. Follow the tree that cries in dry season. The directions sound mythical, but they work. You cross a narrow bridge of woven roots, and there, in a hollow shaped like a sleeping buffalo, you find the first outlines, raised rows, just visible under the grass, forming gentle arcs that catch the light like script. These were not temple gardens, not even royal farms. These were community patches, shared by dozens of families, overseen by moon cycles, and forgotten after generations of war and drought. You kneel and scrape the soil with your fingers. It's light, loamy, with flecks of charcoal, evidence of Swidden farming, where controlled burning enriched the land. A method now out of favor, but once essential to survival. Beside you, a bush leans into the breeze, and under it, you find remnants, shriveled bulbs, fibrous roots, fossilized tendrils. You recognize none of them, and yet you know them. These are the vegetables that didn't make it to temples, didn't win favor in palace kitchens or foreign reports. These were the ones that fed the workers, the ones whose names were never written down, only murmured across generations. As the sun rises, you walk along the shallow ridges, pausing to brush off a broken pottery shard, etched with zigzag lines, perhaps a weight for a net or a seed measure. Farther on, you discover an underground granary pit, half collapsed, but still holding dried fragments that crumble to dust in your hands. You take nothing, only witness. In the afternoon, you meet Soken, an archaeobotanist who's been digging quietly in this region for 7 years. He shows you a catalog of micro-remains he's collected, parenchyma cells, phytoliths, carbonized fragments. This one's likely Domlung prey, he says, pointing to a curled image under a microscope. It's like watercress, but spicier, likely used in soups by laborers in the outer provinces. He hands you a field journal filled with sketches of plants no longer found in modern Cambodia. Among them, Kranhum sling, a vine with leaves that smelled like shrimp paste when torn, used for flavoring leftover rice. Prek tom, a mossy green that grew only on decaying banana trunks. Slek kmoech, the shadow leaf, rumored to keep food from spoiling when wrapped tightly. Ryungmek, a gnarled tuber that tasted metallic, but was prized for its ability to stave off fever. Angkamche, a citrusy bulb sliced raw into sour stews during the monsoon. These didn't disappear because they weren't useful, Sokin says. They disappeared because no one chose them anymore. Tastes changed. People moved. Wars came. But their ghosts are still here. He leads you through a restoration plot, an experimental field, growing reintroduced varieties from ancient seed banks and genetic matches. You pass rows of crooked stems and spindly greens, some thriving, others struggling. One vegetable looks like a miniature palm tree, swaying despite its size. That's Tralach Krohom, Sokin grins. Red artichoke. Everyone thought it was decorative, but it turns out it's edible, when steamed with lime. Another plot contains creeping vines with prickled pods. You pluck one and nibble. It tastes faintly of tamarind and dust. Sokin nods. That's Kang Moi, the one-meal vine. You'll be full for hours. It used to be standard for travelers. At sunset, you and Sokin sit in a small bamboo hut near the field. He serves a soup made from his latest finds, slek kruk, bancho root, domnek lang, and a dash of plai angkor, a peppery herb. It's earthy and strange, comforting in ways you didn't expect. Taste is memory, he says simply, even if you've never eaten it before. That night, you sleep near the field, the quiet hum of recovering plants just outside your door, and as your body slows, your breath syncing with the scent of dew-warmed stalks, you realize this is what the Camere vegetable world has always been. Not just food, but rhythm. A pulse beneath kingdoms. A quiet answer to hunger and hope. You dream of a single seed dropped in dirt long ago, still waiting to grow. And now, as the last echoes of your journey drift away, faded footprints through forest paths, sun-warmed seed bundles, the whisper of drying vines in clay pots, your eyes grow heavier. You've walked fields where empires once sowed more than glory. You've listened to the soft, patient voices of vegetables that once fed kings, monks, builders, and wandering poets. Some sweet, some bitter, all remembered now by you. You've wandered from royal orchards to mountain shrines, from moonlit seed huts to river markets where vegetables passed from hand to hand like quiet offerings. Along the way, you met caretakers of forgotten things, elders who remember by planting, children who learn by tasting, and farmers who still dream in color and soil. And through it all, a single truth grew slowly, like a tendril curling toward light. History doesn't only live in stone or story. Sometimes it lives underground, in the silent persistence of seeds waiting to be needed again. The vegetables of the Khmer Empire weren't just sustenance. They were time capsules of taste, labor, medicine, ritual, and care. So tonight, let your breath soften. Let your body feel the quiet of fields after harvest, the hush between raindrops, the comfort of a kitchen long gone cold, but still fragrant. The past has nothing more to demand of you now, only that you rest. Thank you for spending this time with me, in this gently overgrown corner of forgotten history. If your eyes are still open, know that I'm grateful. If they're closed, know that the stories are still keeping you company. Sleep well, dream of strange vegetables, and if you wake hungry, may you crave something ancient.